Break.
Hello, everyone.
Recording.
Yeah, we'll just, you know how Zoom meetings are. Just a few technical issues that we all planned for, but you know, still had to deal with right at the last minute there. Thank you all for joining us. Just gonna take maybe another minute or so to let everybody in before we officially get started. Okay. All right. Let's see. Okay. So, welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us tonight for Mother Tongue, a reflective conversation about language. We are really excited. We've been planning this actually for quite some time, and it's finally here. Thanks to everybody that registered early and last minute. Thank you for making it here. So before we get started, if you're joining us through Zoom, there's an option to turn on the closed captions at the bottom of your screen. You can do that by clicking on the CC button to show captions. And then if you prefer to view the captions in a separate browser window, you can use the stream text link that Sam will be dropping into the chat right now. And just so you all know, we are recording tonight's event. And we'll be sharing it publicly, so you can watch it again and again and again and as many times as you want, or you can share it with you know, those for folks that were not able to join us tonight. So my name is Mouacheupao. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an Asian American woman with Black hair that's tied back. I'm wearing a gray turtleneck, and I am sitting in front of our little display of skateboards in the back there. I'm the executive director of the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council, also known as MRAC. And so we do our work on the unceded land of the Dakota people, who have been stewards of this land for thousands of years and still are today. And this acknowledgement is important to me as a reflection and a commitment to be partners and neighbors on this land together. Thank you again for joining us on this Monday evening. At MRAC, if you're new to MRAC, our mission is to improve arts access to communities in the 7-county metropolitan area through support to artists and organizations. We're mostly known for providing financial support through grants, which can really be the make or break for a lot of our grant recipients and a lot of our constituents. But you know, in a state where more than 100 languages are spoken in the home, we're also like hyper aware that language is at least one of the many barriers in our grant process. And this is something that we talk a lot about as a staff team, that we talk about as a board. We know that language is culture, it's connection, it's communication, it's identity. And we know that we can't solve these barriers simply by translating our documents, right? Although that's usually a first stop, we know it's not enough. So tonight we've invited a great panel of speakers to have this reflective conversation with us. Unfortunately, Natalia was not able to join us tonight, and so it'll be a smaller panel, but it'll still be mighty. So we're really hoping to highlight the importance of language and bring more nuance to the topic. So to begin, I'm gonna hand it over to my colleague and partner for tonight's event, Sam, who is on our staff team, to start with the introductions.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for being here today. My name is Sam. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a white woman sitting in my home office. There's some plants and acoustic guitar in the background, and I have short wavy brown hair. If you have any technical issues today, please feel free to send me a direct message. I'm here to help you, and I'll also be monitoring the chat for any questions. With that, I'm going to pass it to Fatima to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Fatima Camara. I use she, her pronouns. And oh wait, I'm supposed to give the description of myself as well. I am a Black woman with braids. There's a brown curtain behind me that my mom forced me to hang up because she didn't like my other ones. And yeah, there's also a TV behind me, and I will pass it to Ramona. Someone said it's hard to hear me. Do I need to repeat myself? Am I speaking too low? Is this better?
I think that's better.
Yeah. Okay, so my name is Fatima. I have braids and brown curtains behind me.
Hamitaku yapi. Petukinde owasi. Chante washte anapetu zapie. Ramona Kitto stately emakiapie. Damakota. De Dakota ia iup seyu sewing mieye. Isayanti hechia tahan wahie takawana shakpe edwati. Hello, my relatives. I'm so excited to be here tonight. So thank you for the invitation. My name is Ramona Kitto Stately, and I like to begin with a formal introduction in the Dakota language. That is the language of Minnesota for over 14,000 years. So within that language is embedded our culture, our ways of knowing, our ceremonies, and transmission of language, or transmission of knowledge through language. It has only been since the 1980s that our language was not banned anymore. And so it's always a pleasure to begin in that language, and you can learn so many things about the Dakota through that language. For example, Hami Taku Yepi is just a standard greeting, but it really, it means hello, my relatives, but also it's saying all of life is my relative. And so it's greeting, you know, all the things that are living, the trees and the plants and the animals. And if we grow up and learn with an understanding that we are related to all of these things, we make really different decisions about what people call resources, right? The trees and the water and things like that. So I use she, her pronouns. And I'm not sure if I'm supposed to answer another question, so I'm just going to wait for now, but it's really a pleasure to be here tonight and have this conversation.
Thank you so much, Ramona. I think that you answered the first question about why language is important to you, and I want to give Fatima a moment to also respond to that. So why is language important to you? And why did you agree to be with us tonight?
Language is important to me for a multitude of reasons. First and foremost, English is not the first language of my mother, but it is now the main language that we communicate in, even though I can speak in her native tongue. And so when I go to visit our family in Gambia, that is mostly what I am speaking. It's easier that way. And it's the way that I can connect to and understand my family. You know, my mom like telling me what to do isn't what makes me do those things. It's being able to like speak the language and understand the nuances and the lessons and what is being said to me that informs my actions, you know, understanding what is being said and not necessarily being told what to do. So that's why language, or one of the reasons why language is important to me. And I agreed to be on the panel because I feel very passionate about being a writer and being a resource, but also having conversations about what it means to be first gen, what it means to be bilingual, and what it means even to be like talking about language, and majority of this conversation is going to be in English, but the languages that me and Ramona are speaking that have like qualified us to be here, or that have really taught us what it is that we're about to share, is not what we're going to spend the majority of the panel talking in. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing to name.
Yes. So for those of you that are just joining us today, we had a planning meeting, and we talked about kind of the I don't know if it's attention or just the reality, right? That like we're having this conversation today about language, and we're all doing it in English. And so we came to this with either languages that we've heard or spoken in the home, or that we are reclaiming, or that we are relearning, or, you know, all of these things, right? And this is something that we also talk about at MRAC, just kind of recognizing that, you know, we aspire to be an equitable grant maker, and that means a lot of different things, from the distribution of dollars to the way that we are in relationship with each other and with our communities. And when it comes to language, you know, kind of our default is like, okay, well, we'll translate the documents. We'll, you know, we've tried in the past hiring translators. We have bilingual staff, all of these things. And when it comes down to it, it's the truth of the matter is that language is so much more than just the spoken words. I think, Ramona, you have also alluded to this, right? That it actually, oh, and Fatima, you too. I mean, that it actually kind of almost instructs us with how to live in this world, right? You know, because we support the arts, can you both actually kind of talk about the ways that language affects either your art, the way you see the world, and your life? Ramona, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you. That's such a deep question. So, you know, it's interesting. So I'll begin with my art form, although there's no word for art in the Dakota language. We think about making things beautiful because the creator, you know, we reflect what the creator did, and that's making this beautiful land. But my forte really is making moccasins. And for Dakota people, those in ceremony, we remove our shoes, you know, because we know that the creator recognizes each and every one of our footprints. And so that creates a standard of our footprint and how we walk in the world. And so if your forte is making moccasins, you have a huge responsibility about how does this person walk in the world, and what is the imprint that they make, and what are the hopes and prayers that we carry for the journey, if it's a child, or, you know, for the journey that they make in this world. And so then it becomes a huge responsibility about thinking really thoughtfully about the journey that they make, and then putting symbolism on those shoes that helps other people understand the journey this person makes. So it's really becomes like this heavy responsibility, but also a story. And it's a story that we understand through symbols, that if we
That was such a hot moment too.
Sorry about that. Is that
Oh,
better?
Yep, you're back.
That's happened to me like the last 3 times. Okay, so yeah, so it is telling the story of that person, and that is in everything that we make. Those symbols are so old. they have such meaning. So when we see, say, for instance, as Indigenous peoples across the country, we see someone dress up like an Indian, it's not about the mocking, it's about the misunderstanding. It's about like, you don't have the right. Like, we earn the right. We've learned this knowledge so deeply that even for me to make moccasins, I have to know what those symbols mean. And so, and tell that person's story. So the connection to language is really important, because you have to know what those terms are, you know, what those symbols are named and why they're named that. And it's so embedded in language. And also, when we make moccasins, we have to know also that we don't really narrow ourselves to 5 senses. So all of the learning that we get is based on a colonizer who doesn't have a connection to land. And so we have the 5 senses, but then we also have this ability to communicate through energy that all of us have. And all of us probably understand when I say it, that intuitive sense, that sense of energy when you know something like fear. But we don't even talk about that, you know. And energy is another way of communicating that we include in our teachings as well. And that comes out through art, because when you see the truth, like when we hear the truth, we know it. When you see art that really is compelling to you, it's because it's communicating to you, and it's its own language.
Thank you. Oh, so many things that I want to ask to follow up, but we'll get to that. There's also no Hmong word for art. And I think, Ramona, I've heard you say that before, and I've always wanted to just kind of have a conversation with you about that. But before we do that, I want to hand it over to you, Fatima, to hear how language affects your art in your life.
Language makes me really sensitive. Actually, it makes me really sensitive. I'm very sensitive to the words that people choose. I'm very intentional with my own language. And maybe it even makes me a little bit too critical about what people say sometimes, you know, because, you know, as simple and as cliche as it can sound sometimes, like, words mean things. And so when I am searching for meaning, or when I'm trying to like make meaning of something, I want to be intentional about it, and I want to be sure and concise, but also leave it for interpretation. So the way language affects my art is that it makes me ask myself, what am I trying to make meaning of? And, you know, what do I want people to understand about what it is that I'm trying to say? And speaking a different language, so we speak Maninka, and so there are certain nuances that the English language just can't capture. Like, there's sometimes I find myself trying to like tell a story, and I only know how to say the thing in Maninka. And so and sometimes even the other day I was talking to a friend about some story, and I just like was stuck. I like couldn't even finish it because I didn't have the language, or the words in English, sorry, not the language, the words in English to finish it. And so when I think about like art and why even bring a different language in there, is because I want people to understand what I'm trying to say means, and like how important that is. And so language affects my art in terms of just being intentional, and searching for a kind of understanding across cultures, across values, across language, you know?
So one of the questions that actually came in through the registrations was really related to this, and I think you've all kind of answered the question, but I want to just ask it and see if there's more you want to add. And the question is really about how you create and whether or not, like when you're creating, which language comes to mind? Or, are there times when you use one language more or not? And, I mean, Fatima, we were just talking about how like we like our humor is different when we're in either our home country or when we're like immersed in a different language, right? And so let's start with you. You've already kind of started to talk about it, but like, how do you go between languages when you're creating?
I guess it really depends on what I'm talking about, and not to sound repetitive, but sort of going back to like the nuances and the things that don't exist, the words that don't exist in the English language for me. And also one of the reasons, well, I started writing for myself, but then when I started to really think about what I want people to get out of my writing, I realized that I just wanted to be a resource. I remember being so young and so desperate for other writers talking about what it means to be first gen, or like having parents with a different values than the values of my friends' parents, and but also like loving where I come from and what I come from so much. And so in terms of creating, sometimes I go to language to kind of express those feelings, be it for the next like Gambian kid that is trying to find like another person who is like stressed because their mom doesn't like sleepovers or whatever, because like in our culture we don't do that. You're not going to nobody's house. And so I was so desperate to just have like a resource, like someone to like speak my language. And when I say in this moment, when I'm saying my language, I really mean my experience. And I really had to learn that sometimes language is also about like translating an experience. It's not necessarily like just the words or just like what you're trying to like get across in the moment, but sometimes it is about the story, it's about the memory, it's about like the bodily experience, it's about what that like specific metaphor in your language means historically even. And so there's so much history in language, there's so many lessons. And I think in Ramona, when Ramona was talking in the beginning, speaking to symbols, there's something about like the symbolism and history when you're talking about language. And so that is my long answer, my long-winded answer.
Thank you.
That's so beautiful too. So our language wasn't written for all those thousands of years. So it had to be able to include the symbolism that was really more indicative or symbolic of stories. But our when I think about the artwork, it's always because that a lot of that, the things that we make help to transmit and translate a story and tell a story. So we have these really beautiful turtle amulets. We call them chekpas, that are in the shape of a turtle, and they are made for babies. So when a baby's born, their umbilical actually goes inside. And so it's given to the baby and it stays with the baby once they're disconnected from their mother. Then they're reconnected to our Mother Earth. And that and those star stories, right? So it's like a reconnection to the universe. and a reminder to that child that we are the star people, and to the stars we return. And what's very interesting about this beautiful way of honoring the birthing and the mother and the child is that it wasn't until, DNA that we realized, hey, we are made up of this stardust. It's a part of who we are, but that's always been a part of our stories. So I think language can be also used almost as a weapon, especially when we're not able to use our own, right? It can almost be used as a weapon against you. And for that reason, I think I have more motivation to really use it as much as I can and share it as much as I can, because we have this one word in Dakota, and we call it wamajing, and it means I stand strong in my own power. And that's kind of what, Fatima, I've heard you kind of talk about that. It's like, this is who I am. This has made me strong, is standing in this power and this way of knowing who you are. And imagine if all of us were able to do that. All of us were able to stand in this really strong place, know who we are, and then use that strength to work in and out of communities and help each other. It's not a competitive thing. It's just about understanding, self and identity. And I think we can easily become offended by words, but you never see people offended by, well, maybe, but usually by art. It's like that one language that all of us get, because we are allowed to interpret it ourselves. So I am inspired to use our ways of knowing and our traditional stories to make the art.
Wow. I mean, to have a word that really just, that means I stand strong in my own power.
Right.
Is so, is incredible. And also kind of highlights what's missing in the English language.
Yes.
And it makes me question what's missing in the culture then, right? Because I think to have a word that has such a deep and powerful meaning also is reflective of the culture, right? And the way that you either feel about yourself or about each other. Fatima, you had brought up a couple of things about kind of your identity and your experience as a first generation. And I can't remember if you said immigrant or just a first generation, first gen. I also am a first gen. And when I say I'm a first gen, I mean the first American born child to my parents who are Hmong refugees. And in our house, early on, my parents, I think, felt like assimilation was really the only way that we would be able to survive in America. They came through war, but my mom reminds me, like, they didn't have running water, they didn't have electricity in their homes. She never owned a pencil or paper until she came to the US. I mean, like, all these things, right? And so it's really sad, and it's so upsetting in so many ways to think about how they felt like assimilating my brother and my brothers and I was the only way for us to survive. And so it took a long time for me to actually relearn Hmong, and I'm still doing it now. But I think what you were saying about like wanting to find other people that kind of spoke the same language or that had shared those experiences was really important. Can you say a little bit more about that? What is it like when you find people that speak the same language as you? What does that do for you? How does that benefit you?
Well, I would say I think I'm still kind of searching if we're speaking specifically to creating and writing and finding other Gambian writers. that has not happened for me. But I do feel a lot of comfort in speaking to other people who are first gen, and other people who do speak another language. You know, even earlier when you were saying, so earlier before you all joined us, you wonderful people joined us, you know, Kathy was sharing like how sometimes like the voice in her head is not in English and in another language, and I felt that, and that excited me because I understood completely what that means. Like I understand that completely. So I find sort of like comfort and joy and relation and resource in that. Um, but as for, you know, speaking Maninka, that happens when I'm basically talking to family or actually in Gambia. It doesn't really happen here to with people I'm not related to, um, which would be cool. So if you know any Gambians, some writers, you know, but I would say I'm probably still searching for that, but there is so much joy in just being able to speak with people in other languages. You know, I love that Ramona didn't open up in English, and I'm pretty sure drew us all in with that. And you know, simple things like listening to music that's not in my language and not in English either. And, you know, trying to kind of figure out how do I feel about this other language that I'm hearing that I don't necessarily know all the words to, but what is it drawing out of me? What feelings is it bringing out? And then when it's done, going up and looking that thing up, um, I think is something that I kind of lean into, to kind of fill that waiting, because I'm gonna meet the other Gambian writer. It'll happen, you know, but still kind of waiting on that.
Yeah, so big call out to any Gambian writers out there, or if there's anybody in our audience tonight that knows of any other Gambian writers, please connect us, hit us up. Ramona, you talked about how the Dakota language was banned until the 80s, until the 1980s.
Yes.
Can you share a little bit more about that and what you think the impact of those types of policies and laws have on people, on a community, on a nation?
Yeah, because you know the language is your very identity, and the language is what makes all of our stories make sense. It makes the place that we live make sense. So, for example, the Dakota people, their floral is floral that grows here in Minnesota, so it's connected to place. So part of the genocidal acts to all Indigenous people across the country was ban the language, you know, reduce and destroy food, remove them. So either through germ warfare, kill them, or remove them, because they knew that in order to take the land, which is the purpose of coming here and, you know, colonization, part of that was you have to get rid of the people because they are so connected to place, which was great for the colonizer because they learned, right? They learned how to eat and how to grow food in this place, how to travel. So, but they knew there was this strong connection, and one of the important things was to remove the people from place because that's a connection. So my people live in Santee, Nebraska. You know, my people are from Minnesota, but in 1862, we were exiled outside the borders of this state, and that was what our original governor said. The Sioux Indians of Minnesota must be exterminated or driven forever beyond the borders of this state. And a lot of that was about the connection to place, right? Moving them away. There are stories about the ho-chunk removal when they would come back and hug the trees, you know, and that's sensing that energy and connection to place. And then we, you know, we don't tell the story. We don't talk about all of those removal tactics that for me as a Dakota woman in Minnesota happened 160 years ago. I mean, that's my dad's grandpa. And when you think of it in those terms of, we all know our mother or father's grandma or grandpa, we've seen a picture, we are familiar with something that they did, and we don't tell that history in our state. We don't know that history, none of, and then we think, wow, we've got leaders in these really huge organizations making decisions about Native people when they don't really have any idea of our history, right? So I think it's these kind of things are so important because, first of all, diversity is beautiful. Diversity is necessary in a garden, right? We understand that. But then as we look at these beautiful communities and how we can weave this beautiful, colorful template or, piece of art with all of this different knowledge and all of these different ways of knowing, it's really important. But America was really kind of built on everybody come here and we're all going to be the same. And being the same is, boring, right? Being different is beautiful and it's necessary.
Absolutely. At MRAC, we talk about how, or I talk about, everybody loves the idea of diversity. They talk about how it's important. Everybody wants and needs diversity, but everything is structured for assimilation. And, I think the MRAC staff and board is probably the most diverse it's ever been. And it's hard. It is hard, but it is beautiful, right? It's in that diversity. If you're not just trying to make everybody the same, but look different, but act the same, it's where we come up with our best ideas. It's where we come up with like true innovation, where we can really be creative, is actually in that difference. So I am 100% with you there also. I started off by saying, there are over 100 languages spoken in Minnesota, just in Minnesota. And I feel like you're starting to address this question, Ramona. So I'm just going to ask it now. But what would a community look like that fully embraces differences in languages? I think that I appreciate the history that you just shared with us. I think that that is a really clear example of what it looks like when it is not embraced and how damaging it is. But in your opinion, what would it look like if we lived in a community that fully embraced the differences in languages? And I'm going to add on to that, just for a very selfish reason too, for an organization like MRAC, what should we be thinking about in terms of how do we embrace different languages for an organization that, is stewards of resources, but really has a process that has been built and designed around the English language. So the first part is, what would it look like if a community fully embraced differences, but specifically for an organization like MRAC, and for those in our audience today that also work in organizations that are really trying to embrace different languages, what kind of advice would you give us? I'm going to go to you first, Ramona, because Fatima, yeah.
So number one, we have to value it, right? As a society, we have to value languages. And it's really interesting. I have been an educator for many, many years. And in a K-12 school district in Minnesota, children who speak dual languages are actually placed in these separate programs because they're thought of as not as smart. But if you look at a private school where a child is learning Spanish or French, they're considered really smart, right? So we have also this dichotomy of value systems about people who speak more than one language. I think what's really important, and if we go to Europe, we go to other places, most people are at least dual language speakers. You know, it's really important to, and like my son speaks Dakota, teaches at MPS in a language immersion school. And his goal is to think, dream, philosophize in our language. And we don't really get the opportunity to embrace it that way, but it's just so, it just broadens your mind to know and understand at least another language. And we don't have a value on that. So I think all children should learn a second language at least. Private schools do that, you know, or immersion schools that we have now. Oh, we got to do a Badote tour. I know that Eden Bart is on here. We got to do a Badote tour for the Chinese immersion school in St. Paul. And that was just so exciting to share and to highlight, you know, the differences. But I think as a community and as organizations, first of all, we have to say they're important. Second of all, we have to be humble, because it's kind of embarrassing as a grown-up to mispronounce words and not know what you're saying, because right, those things under an American value system make us look weak, and nobody wants to look weak. So we have to first of all allow ourselves to be humble and embrace different languages, even if it's just beginning with words, you know. And especially in Minnesota, we have so many words that tell us something. So Mouacheupao, which is mispronounced Mankato, it's telling us that that is where the blue earth dye comes from. So if you go into the clay riverbeds and you take that clay and you smash it on your hand, you find that natural blue earth dye. So it's been kind of misnamed as Blue Earth County. And so we don't really understand that, you know what, this is a language. This is an important like piece of information, but we don't go beyond that. And there's just so much more to know and learn. The English language is really kind of like a bunch of different languages pulled together. It's not even like, it's my son says it's the worst language. It really, and it's easy to misunderstand. Other languages are not so easy to misunderstand because they're very particular. So I don't know, just we have to create an environment where people value different languages and are willing to learn. And I think, I'm always saying, let's start with our children because they're brilliant and we can change in a generation, right?
Thank you. Fatima?
Our community where we embrace multiple languages, what that would look like, what that world would look like. Well, I think first it would require the government and a lot of these like really affluent institutions to release some money into the community. Just even hearing you talk about MRAC and what MRAC is trying to do, MRAC does like I'm someone who's applied for the Next Step grant, and what I think about is what would it mean if there were for all of the many languages spoken here in Minnesota, if there were specific panels or groups divided up for people to submit in their language, and then you put money into that specific focus group or that specific community, so that even when they release art with English and Spanish, because the speakers of that language understand the nuances, they give them the understanding and the respect and the love, or even the criticism and the constructive feedback that it deserves, because they're informed, because it is their language, you know. Well, even with diversity and everything, something that is important is like affinity groups and places where you do see people that look like you or understand you, and there is no explanation. And it is okay to create that, so that those people can succeed and we open our minds. And even in Ramona's answer talking about private schools and like where's the difference in young people that get put in separate classes or ESL classes or whatever else, is that there's money in these private schools and institutions and there isn't over here. So they just push them to the side because it takes more work to explain or just explain a little bit to someone who speaks something different than you. Even with people you speak English with, like sometimes when they don't understand you, you're like, never mind, like I don't want to repeat myself. Like we're so impatient. Like what are we rushing towards? We're all right here, and so I think it looks like releasing some money and I think it looks like not wanting to be the one with the answer or the savior, but looking to people who really have the tools and the skills to develop and create these spaces where language is celebrated. And yeah, and there's probably more than just that as well. There's so much more than that, but that's what I'm immediately thinking of.
And I just want to share a word with you because I think it's so beautiful. Our language is so beautiful, but we have a word for an elder. And sometimes I'm sad to see how elders are treated, even though we know they have to know they have so much life experience and they're so amazing, and they're not treated so well in America. But our word for a woman elder is Winuchchada, and it translates to a fully blossomed woman. And I just think that says it all. In learning languages, how we define people really helps us to understand or to remember how important they are, right? And then that's connecting them to this natural, beautiful, like I think of a flower, a rose or something, but we knew Jada, just beautiful descriptive language.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you want to strive to be an elder. It becomes something that you actually aspire to become, versus I think in some cultures or languages where it really becomes something more dreadful. But to aspire to be a fully blossomed woman is actually very beautiful. So Ramona, as you're teaching us different Dakota words, which I really appreciate, there was a question early on, when you opened up with hello, my relatives. And in the chat, someone asked, is it okay to use that greeting moving forward? Is it okay for other people to use that greeting moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's perfectly fine. I think it's a beautiful way of thinking about the world, is to not only acknowledge the people in the room as relatives, because we're establishing a relationship, right? We're establishing some trust and some relationship with people, but also with the natural world. And if we had this connection to and relational connection to the natural world in Minnesota 160 years ago, because all of you must know that we have the decisions made by the leadership in Minnesota in 160 years has polluted every river and lake in our state. And we have the responsibility of the headwaters of the Mississippi. And even in our language as Dakota people, Mani is water and it means life, our very life force. That's what the word means. So yes, I think it's really important to acknowledge not only people, but the natural world as our relatives, and talking about that relationship, because with that tree out there, people can say, oh, you're a tree hugger, but you know what? That tree and us are sharing breath, aren't we? what we're breathing out, right? They're reciprocating. We can't live without that. And if every person in Minnesota went away today, the water would flourish. But if the water went away, we would all die. So we have to think of how important that is. And I think if we're in addressing hello, my relatives is teaching us that.
Wow, thank you. We are already at the end of our program, which I feel like I could sit here and talk with both of you for many more hours. Okay, I do want to go back to this idea, Fatima, that you had brought up, because it was actually a question that somebody had sent in the registration regarding this idea of like allowing for applications to come in different languages. And this is actually something that we want to do at MRAC, right? We want to learn how to do it. We want to be able to do it. So the question was really, would you apply in a different language? But I think you've already said that you would. I guess to add on to that question, do you have any ideas or thoughts about how we could actually create a process to allow for that type of exchange? Like, is it enough to just translate our questions from English to a different language and then have people apply in their native language?
I would apply because I do apply for grants and have things in, you know, different languages. And I do have some ideas, but that sounds like a planning process, like a consultation kind of thing. So, but I am down to talk offline about that, you know. But in this moment, it seems like a larger conversation that is going to take more than 5 minutes or 4 now. And so, but I do think that there could be processes that honor the work people put in their applications in these different languages, and also that honors their history and where they come from and what it is that they're trying to push into the world.
Valid, very valid. I just felt like, okay, I know we only have like 5 minutes left. This question came in. I'm curious. I'm gonna put it out there, but just know that we at MRAC have been thinking a lot about this, and we'll continue to kind of try to develop, and we'll probably be reaching out to both of you to help us in a different way. So in closing, I mean, I want to thank you both for being here, but I also want to just kind of hand it over to each of you to share any last thoughts you want to leave us with. And because I know it's on everybody's mind, how can they either see your work, be in the audience of something that you're doing in the future, whether it's art related or not? How can people stay engaged with you after today? So the first part is just any parting words, anything else that you feel like you didn't get to say that you'd like to, and then how can we stay connected? Ramona?
Okay. So I just want to say Pidamayaye, and that in our language means you make me grateful. And so I want to say, you know, thank you, because I think that we can learn so much, and being a part of a conversation like this is exciting. And it kind of gets us thinking about how we're focused on, you know, just this one thing, and we're not embracing all the beauty that we can and all the knowledge, the other ways of knowing, and that we want to raise some beautiful, intelligent Wakayeja, these little kids. And how can we do that if we don't, you know, expose them to all these different ways of knowing? It's important. It creates critical thinkers. And you can find me. I'm not really always known as an artist, but I do make moccasins, and I have a pair in the Science Museum. But you can catch me. I'm the project director for We Are Still Here, Minnesota. And it's a whole group of Native-led organizations and allies who come together to help each other to change a narrative and to create visibility of the Indigenous peoples of Minnesota.
Cool. And then aren't you also don't you also lead the tours for the Badote Learning from Place?
Yes, you can find that on the Minnesota Humanities Center website. And yes, I lead the Badote tours, places of power in the Twin Cities. That's amazing. You can't unknow what you learned that day.
Thank you. Fatima, any last words and how can we stay connected with you?
I am grateful. Thank you for, hosting the panel, asking my opinion, as I know there are many, many other bilingual people all over Minnesota that probably have a lot to offer as well. And so thank you for thinking of me. Um, so one of the organizations that, okay, I know you said, where can we find you, but I have to shout out True Art Speaks. True Art Speaks is an arts-based nonprofit out of St. Paul, and they cultivate literacy, leadership, and social justice through the study and application of spoken word and hip hop culture. And when I was a little bitty baby and 15, 16 years old, I participated in their programming, and now I've worked with them for the last 7 years. And that organization has like helped me in so many ways as like an artist, as a professional, and as just like a human being who considers themselves like an active part of this community. And was one of the first places I felt comfortable speaking my language, writing in my language, and sharing things about where I come from, and like letting me know like how cool I was, honestly. And so
Yeah.
I feel like in this moment, to be so comfortable talking about language, I have to like go back and celebrate one of the first places and kind of show a little bit of gratitude. So instead of where you can find me, please support that organization. Please support Short Speaks. Please make a donation if you would like to them, because they are doing the work for so many young people of so many different kinds of backgrounds. And I know so many people that would maybe, not maybe, but that would say the same. So if anything I said meant anything to anybody, I would love if that gratitude could be extended to that organization.
Thank you. Thank you both so much for spending this time with us today and for sharing really honestly your experiences. And I think just a reminder for everyone, this is recorded. If you don't receive our newsletters, you can sign up for our newsletters and be notified, or you can just check our YouTube in a couple of weeks if you don't want to sign up for another newsletter. We'll also provide a link at our Facebook page. And I think, Ramona, you've really inspired me. So I really want to say to everybody, "Ochandao," which means thank you very much, and "Muotoa," which means go but come back. So thank you, everyone. Yeah, thanks for joining us tonight.